Welcome back. It is college hoop season. Almost time for March Madness. The NCAA tournament kicks off next week, and this weekend is Selection Sunday. Joining us with his picks and predictions is Noah Frank from WTOP. Noah, good to see you back with us.
Thanks for having me.
So you're a real junkie about this, right?
Yeah,
You've got your own bracketology all figured out and everything.
Well, I'm a baseball and college basketball guy above everything else, but this is my favorite time of year when you have spring training coming in and March Madness right around the corner. And really this week, there's so much going on every day because everybody's playing. Every single conference is either has just wrapped or is just starting their conference tournaments. And you know, it's all about making it to March Madness.
Sure.
If you don't have your name in that field, it's sort of the separation of when only people like me pay attention to college basketball and when everybody pays attention. It really is sort of the biggest event in American sports, and so this is the chance for everybody to play their way in this week.
And you're not alone with your enthusiasm. Let's talk about our local teams, starting with Maryland Terrapins.
Yeah, so Maryland's had a great season, but they've slumped a little bit down the stretch. People were talking about them maybe even being a #1 seed as recently as a couple weeks ago. They're probably, based on the model that we have projected, and a lot of other people have them right about a 4 seed right now, which is still really good, and there's so much parity that it's hard to say that there's that much difference between, really the 1 through 6 seeds in a lot of cases. Every team in the nation has at least 4 losses. If people remember last year, Kentucky came in undefeated. The question was, could they run an undefeated season? There's no team even close to that. I mean, there's so much more parity. So they have the Big Ten tournament coming up. They'll play, depending on how it shakes out, either Wisconsin or Rutgers or Nebraska. The Big Ten quarterfinals on Friday. They could get up to as high as maybe a high 3 or even a low 2 seed if they win the Big Ten tournament, but they might drop as far as even maybe a 5 or even a 6 seed if they lost that opening round game just because they haven't played that well lately. I'm sure the committee wants to see them do a little better down the stretch.
Do you have your eye on certain players? I mean, there are some stars, right?
Yeah, I mean, I've said it before. I think they have the best starting 5 in the country. When you talk about 1 through 5, I don't think anybody has that much balance. Melo Trimble's the guy that everybody talks about, and Diamond Stone, who just this morning I think was named Big Ten Newcomer of the Year, is sort of the freshman of the year. But I think the key for them is Robert Carter. He was a transfer from Georgia Tech. He sat out last year when they returned to the tournament. The sort of talk around campus was that the best player in the program wasn't even playing last year, and it's because he was sort of conditioning and getting stronger. And he's this prototype of this sort of, we call him a stretch forward in basketball, who's the guy who's built like a power forward but has the athleticism to play inside, outside, can shoot the 3, can do a lot of things. I think if they're going to make a deep run, it's going to be on his back.
An all-around player.
Yeah, I mean, he really is. And I think you'll see him drafted, pretty highly in the NBA draft.
All right, we've got some other local teams. You think Georgetown Hoyas?
So Georgetown has to play their way in. They're one of these teams that's really sort of underachieved this season. They're under 500, and so the only chance of them making the postseason really is to win out in the Big East tournament up in Manhattan this weekend. They've got a really tough draw because they get DePaul. They're in the 8-9 game. They get DePaul at 7 p.m. on Wednesday night. And if they win, they have to be back at noon Thursday to play Villanova, which is one of the top 2 or 3 teams in the entire country. So
that's a tough turnaround.
They'll earn it if they
wow.
get in. And then of course they have to win Friday and Saturday as well. So work cut out for them. They've got a great senior guard in Devontae Smith-Rivera. LJ Peak is playing well. I mean, they have guys, they have some talent, but they've really underachieved this year. The team that maybe has a better chance, well, it certainly has a better chance, but to kind of keep an eye on this weekend is GW going into the Atlantic 10 tournament. Most people have them projected just outside the field. That's what our model kind of has them at too, and then like that next 4 out. So maybe that's that second group of 4 teams outside of the bubble right now. They have an RPI of 63, which is not great. You'd like to see that in the 40s somewhere. They only have 3 wins against the top 50, but they're 22-9, and they've had a very good season. They've just lost some kind of head-scratching games. Really could have helped themselves if they'd won their regular season finale at Davidson last weekend, but they didn't. So they probably have to win 2 or more games in the A-10 tournament if they're going to make it in. They get the winner of George Mason and St. Louis, which is a game they absolutely should win, on Thursday. They get a tough St. Joe's team on Friday that's probably a loser-out game. Whoever loses that game probably doesn't make the field. And then they might probably get Dayton, the top seed, on Saturday. If they can at least get to Dayton and show well against Dayton, they got to feel pretty good. If they beat Dayton, I have to think that they're in.
Okay. What do you think the #1 seeds, the top seeds? Who do you think they'll be?
Some of it's going to come down to the conference tournaments. That's always how it happens. If you win your conference tournament and you're already sort of in that mix, you have a much better chance. Right now, before we even get there, we're looking at Kansas, really the top team in the country. Villanova we mentioned, and then it's sort of this mix of North Carolina and Xavier and Virginia and Michigan State all have a really good sort of claim at a number one. If Oklahoma wins the Big 12 tournament, I think they'll be a number one. So, I don't think it makes too much difference between 1s and 2s this year. I don't see, and we'll have to wait until all the bracket fills in from the bottom. Every year we talk about, is this going to be the year a 16 beats a 1? I don't really see necessarily that there's a 16 or 15 even that stands out that much, that it's going to make too much of a difference if you're a 1 or a 2. Again, waiting until we see the specific matchups. But those 6 teams are pretty clearly kind of the 6 or 7 teams, the top seeds.
But it's those Cinderella teams that bust all our brackets, right?
Yeah, there's I mentioned the parity before. I think that's worth kind of really emphasizing. There are so many teams that have 5 or 6 losses that are mid-major teams, even teams like St. Mary's that people probably just don't even have an eye on, that are in all likelihood going to win their WCC final tonight. They're a team that could go to the Sweet 16. They're a team that'll probably be a 9 or a 10 seed somewhere in there and could easily wreck somebody's bracket. And there's teams like that floating all over. The Dayton team that I mentioned has struggled a little bit, but we've seen 2 years ago they were in the Elite Eight. They seem to always make a good run. There's a lot of mid majors and teams people I think are sleeping on or that just they don't know that much about that could go really far. Well,
you have to mention the Lady Terps. They've got another hot season going, right? Coming off the Big Ten this weekend.
Brenda Fries has built just a juggernaut there, and it's the only problem is that there's UConn and then there's everybody else in women's college basketball, and they're on the brink of 70 straight wins. They played the number 2 team in the country on the road, South Carolina, earlier this year, and just crushed them. And it's great that the Terps are back where they were last year, and they're a top 5 team in the country. They're looking at a number 1 seed potentially.
But still, there's UConn.
But you got to get through UConn. It's just you hope you can avoid them as long as possible.
All right, we got to talk about the departure of RG3, released from the Redskins yesterday. Not unexpected.
No, we saw this coming as soon as really probably when Kirk Cousins was named the starter last year, that this was a potential thing that could happen, and certainly once he played well. One of our sports writers has a piece up today about how the 2 Tampa games, ironically, a team that we don't think about as being much of a force necessarily, but the 2 Tampa games the last 2 years have sort of defined the career arcs of RG3 and Kirk Cousins, because RG3 really struggled against a really bad Tampa team, and that was sort of the beginning of the end, if you will, and then Cousins led them back from after that horrible first half to what turned out to be the biggest comeback in franchise history this year. Certainly once they tagged Cousins and once they made that official and put the franchise tag on him, it was clear that it was just a matter of how they dispatched the release, were they able to work out a trade.
So where do you think he'll go? Where's he going to end up?
I think there's
talk about Dallas, maybe.
No, I don't think he makes sense in Dallas, outside of the fact that it's Texas. You look at their system; they run a very sort of standard pro pocket passer system with Tony Romo. That's not what RG3 is best at. I know they've tried to make him into a pocket passer. He's tried to make himself into a pocket passer, but by his very nature, his ability to move outside the pocket and stretch a defense is what makes him great when he is great. I've seen teams like Kansas City talked about as a backup to Alex Smith, who is a lot like him. And you look at the prototypes that are like him. You look at Alex Smith. You look at Cam Newton. You look at Russell Wilson, guys who have the ability to do that. If he can find the right system, or if a team is willing to kind of mold around what he does well, as opposed to Jay Gruden coming in and just kind of saying, well, this is what I do well, and Kirk fits better for that. I think a team like Houston could make a lot of sense. They don't have a real solid situation at quarterback, but they have a great defense, and they have a decent enough running game and things that can take pressure off of RG3 to allow him to succeed.
In the meantime, Kirk Cousins is the guy, right, for this team. Do you really feel that he is the franchise player that will lead Washington to a successful future?
I don't know. I think the jury's still out, and I think that they did the only responsible thing to do in assigning him the franchise tag this year. if you look, I mean, basically they had three options. They could not sign him as an unrestricted free agent, which wouldn't have been smart. They could do what they did, or they could sign him to a long-term deal, and he wanted a lot more money than they were willing to give up. Well, he hasn't. I mean, he had a very nice stretch for the final 10 games of the season, but those 10 games were completely different than the rest of his career. I mean, he threw 23 touchdowns and 3 interceptions in the last 10 games. He threw more interceptions than touchdowns prior to that in his career. So, which Kirk Cousins is the real Kirk Cousins long term? This allows them to. They're paying him $20 million this year, but they probably would have paid him a lot anyway on a long-term deal. So, it allows them to just say, hey, look,
we're going to see a little bit more of you this year.
Yeah, and it's going to cost him more than it would have cost them if he has a great year, but then it's worth it because then you have a more proven commodity. You know what you're getting. If he leads them back to the playoffs, then they're back in the playoffs. If he doesn't,
then he'll get a lot more money.
Well, yeah, but if he doesn't and it doesn't work out, then it doesn't work out, and you haven't invested yourself 4 or 5 years down the road in maybe what isn't the long-term solution.
All right, we will be watching. Thanks so much, and I wish you the best of luck with your bracket this year.
Thanks. We'll see if my numbers actually match up. I think there's so much up in the air that this last week should be really interesting.
It's early yet. All right, Noah Frank, WTOP, thanks for coming in today.
Thank you.
And we're back with more News Talk right after this.